This gentleman is a television columnist. He writes for TV Week, and he's also got his blog, TV Howl. And I can tell this guy is going to fit in perfectly with us because the tagline on TV Howl says the best TV columnist in America. And I appreciate anybody that can put that up there about themselves on there. I can tell we're going to get along great, Adam. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Well, it's really nice of you to have me on and to mention that tagline that I put on my blog at a moment of really irrational hubris. But I thought, in the new internet world, this is what you do. You package yourself. You know what I mean? And for all I know, 3 people read that thing. But but I insist that I am the best TV columnist in America. And you should know, if you don't, that I spent 20 years at the New York Post covering television.
I do indeed.
And so some of your listeners may know me from that. So it's great to be on.
I think
and
so.
To follow George the Animal Steele.
Yeah,
I mean, that's really amazing.
Yeah, how do you follow that act, huh?
Well, I don't know, with a full Nelson. I don't know, drop kick or whatever they call those things.
He used to, he used to use some it wasn't a full Nelson. I think he had some kind of hammer lock back in his heel days. But
yes.
Yeah, it's
remember the soprano drop? That was one of the great moves.
That's just absolutely an awesome one right there. But it's great to have you on. As you mentioned, a lot of stuff that you did at the New York Post. You're doing some great things now here with TV Week, with the new media angle on it, with TV Howl, and again. You've been on top of some of the biggest stories that we've seen really in the business here. But again, what we've seen over the course of the last 2 weeks, I mean, to me, it's the biggest story of 2009 in terms of pop culture. I'd argue even bigger than the inauguration of this president. When you look at this to me is just one of these things. We get these only very sporadically, I think, in American life. John Lennon, Princess Di. I'm trying to think of anybody else in there, but this just doesn't come around every day.
Well, it's interesting. Those 2 unfortunate deaths that you just mentioned were certainly surprise deaths. John Lennon being murdered and everything. Mm-hmm. And however, just reading something online about the viewership for the Michael Jackson Memorial, and did you know that the Ronald Reagan funeral, and I think it was 2004, 2003, actually had more viewers than Princess Di's funeral and more than the Michael Jackson Memorial.
Really?
It's fascinating, yeah. Now, I guess in 2004, he had 35 million viewers. And it's estimated today that the Jackson Memorial Service on maybe a dozen networks had 31 million. It's a little bit like splitting hairs, I suppose. Mm-hmm. But someone made a good point in the story that, and they can't count this yet, if at all, that a lot of people watched the Jackson Memorial via the new media of either handheld devices or the Internet. Mm-hmm. And for all we know, that added more millions than we can calculate. So it's interesting what you said about as far as the year in pop culture and equating this last 2 weeks with the inauguration of President Obama. That's very interesting. You're the first person I've heard to talk about those 2 in the same sentence. Which ranks higher? I'll tell you what ranks as the biggest surprise is this Michael Jackson thing. Are you surprised, as I am, at the outpouring?
I am a little bit, but part of it, I think part of it's tied up, and this is where, and I've decried on this show, the backlash, that we're seeing in some quarters and everything like that, because again, I think what a lot of people are mourning in a sense, Adam, we're mourning part of our own lives here. We've all got memories of stuff. I mean, I'm the quintessential example of that. I was a kid when Thriller came out. I mean, I grew up in that period of time. I mean, we've all got memories of our lives tied up with that, and there's something that, especially for the freak show that the guy's life degenerated into, there's something that people feel not glad that he's gone, but at least glad that the good memories of him are liberated from that somehow. I don't know how much of this is mourning for him per se, and about maybe something else. I don't know how you see it.
This is so interesting on so many levels, and I'll try not to go off on 10 different tangents. But the reason I asked about whether you were surprised, I suppose, is because I was. I mean, I guess maybe it's because I was in the tabloid media for a long time, and sometimes you tend to focus, as you were talking about just a moment ago, on sort of the tabloid issues, the freak show issues. I mean, pardon me for saying this, but until he died and the entire world wept, I thought he was considered by most to be an unfortunate and tragic, frankly, a has-been.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I mean, I know he was planning these shows and everything, and the fanatics who will always love him, I suppose, bought all the tickets. But that's not like a billion people worldwide. That's however many thousands were able to get tickets. So it's been very interesting to see the nostalgia. You say you're the generation of Thriller. I go back farther than that to the Jackson 5.
Mm-hmm.
And you do feel like you grew up with people.
Yeah.
And there's been a great PR push on the part of the Jackson camp. And I don't say that cynically, but in this week and a half of coverage, if you've watched basically the cable news every evening, cable news channels, you've seen a kind of full-court press out there of storytelling by people who knew him, sort of illuminating the real man behind the wax face. You know what I mean?
Right.
And he seems to be not such a bad guy. And I'm starting to come around to think that he wasn't really a freak. He was kind of a soft-spoken guy. He was kind of different, maybe almost like an alien from another planet, but he was not harmful.
Yeah.
And I think the only people that can testify to the harm he did is anyone, frankly, he may have allegedly behaved improperly with. And you know what I'm alluding to.
Yes.
I don't want to draw pictures here on your show, but, you know, maybe he wreaked some real havoc in some kids' lives, or maybe not. You know, in that trial they held, there was reasonable doubt enough to acquit him. And I'm beginning to have the same reasonable doubts as they may have had in that courtroom.
That's the strange thing. I'm kind of coming around to that, too. Do you get the sense, though, on this, because there are, you know, we've seen both sides of this come to, you know, more to light in recent days. The whole thing of, you know, potential evidence that he may have been set up versus potential evidence that, hey, look, the kid knew what his genitalia looked like, swore to it, whatever, it matched the photographs, you know, so that, I mean, do you get the sense that you and I might be thinking he might not have done it because that's what we want to believe right now?
There's some of that. That's another aspect of the great complication that this has sort of caused in our brains. Because if you read the details that we're forgetting, I suppose, like you just mentioned, the identification of private physical characteristics, then yes, it does seem like if you refer to the cut and dried court papers, which I suppose you could find on smokinggun.com or if you go on the Vanity Fair magazine website, you know, they've reposted all their coverage that they did, those in-depth stories by Maureen Orth over the years. If you go back and look at them, perhaps your doubts about that you're feeling now about his behavior may in fact be quelled in the belief that he did do these things. In a way, again, because I was not one who was molested, and therefore I have no emotional baggage about him, it's almost like death, to me, who was not involved in those things, liberates him from those tragic and upsetting stories. And what is durable is the art that he left. And in the end, art is really the only thing that does last. You know, it really is. I don't know if they'll be listening to Michael Jackson in 1,000 years, but, and that's a whole other issue. You know, has he gotten, is the praise being offered to him or the praise about him, is it in fact too high at times?
It could be. Even on the artistic level where the man was a genius, there could be some hyperbole out there. I want to ask you about this, too, because I'm fascinated by everything about this, the dichotomy, the mixed emotions, everything that we just don't know what to make of this.
I've been very sad about it.
Yeah.
For no reason. I didn't know the man.
Oh, you know, but you know what? But again, you don't have to justify that. He's got 3 kids he left behind. He's got a family that, you know, might have been dysfunctional in some ways, but you know what I mean? There's human reasons.
Yeah, that's true, and I think they loved him. Yeah. You know, he was their unusual brother.
Yeah,
and you love him anyway. You know.
Part of how the prism of this has changed is I would have cynically said before this happened, their meal ticket. I wouldn't say that anymore. I think that we've seen that they did love him and didn't look at him necessarily that way, and that maybe they weren't all hangers-on, but and I think matter of fact, the real hangers-on I think are the ones that were not related to him that were on the inside. But as we look at this, I'm fascinated by all the different angles of this that maybe we'll never be able to fully reconcile. Here's one of them. I was talking to a friend the night of the Michael Jackson death coverage when it first hit, and he agreed with me, and I said, on one level, this is just insanely shocking. Mm-hmm. On another level, could this have ended any other way? We didn't think we'd see, on a subconscious level even, you didn't think this guy was going to go 80 years old quietly in the middle of the night. Everything in the last 2 decades had been such a tabloid freak show.
True.
This is the only coda that there really could have been. We're shocked that it happened, but by the same token, we can't be shocked because it's the logical culmination of everything in the man's life.
Well, or does it only seem logical in hindsight that he would die in the larger-than-life manner of Elvis Presley or Marilyn Monroe or James Dean? You know what I mean? Because had he not died, Rick, he'd be alive, and for all we knew, he might have lived to be a crazy 80-year-old.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows? It's very interesting about these health issues with him. I guess we may or may not learn about what they were, whether he was so skeletal that he could do nothing more than drop dead, or he was in fact in the peak of physical health and ready to do 50 shows.
Yeah, I mean, and we've heard wildly different accounts of that, and the truth is going to come out, I think, as it always does. But what I'm wondering also here, we talked a little bit about the notion of, and again, you've written some excellent stories on this, whether it be the one of now he can rest in peace, or the other one about that now he belongs to the ages. Your coverage of the ceremony itself yesterday,
which I thought was a beautiful thing. It really was.
It was, and you know what, and you could have been cynical about things maybe to an extent going in, but the notion of his daughter getting up there at the end and saying what she said and everything like that. I mean, if you don't sit there, and feel a little choked up about that, you're just not human.
Well, when we write those things, you sometimes focus right on the visceral, instant reaction.
Yeah.
And I felt that was the right way. Now, I've thought about it a lot, and there are reasons to be cynical. I mean, get ready for them to package the memorial service itself on a DVD.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
I mean, of course they will. And then, I mean, these things, you've probably done the same thought process. You think about one angle on this Michael Jackson story, then you cancel it out with something else in your head. Like, yeah, you could say it's crass the way they're going to market his death, and they're going to turn Neverland into a Graceland, and they're going to have exhibits there, and people are going to go by the busload. But then you think, that might seem crass, but then you think, why don't they have the right to do that? This is America. It's only crass if they make it crass. It doesn't have to be tasteless. I mean, Graceland itself isn't that tasteless. I've been to Graceland.
Yeah. Oh,
it's a very interesting tour that you take there.
I'm sure.
And he was a very important guy, Elvis.
Oh, sure, yeah. I see that. But having said that, you talk about Elvis. Boy, it didn't take Joe Jackson long to play the Colonel Tom Parker card, did it? He'll be bigger dead than he was alive.
Well,
as bad as that was.
And then you come down to some of the personalities involved, and you think, is Joe just 80 years old and addle-brained or something?
Yeah.
Or was he always kind of this cruel, single-minded business guy who trained his children like they were in an animal act, and beating them if they didn't jump through the flaming hoop the right way, and you get that impression from some of Michael's interviews that have been aired in the past week.
Yeah,
the ones with Oprah, the ones with Martin Bashir. Joe is one of the more pathetic figures that we've seen. Now, luckily, he kind of disappeared after the second or third day from the public view. Did you notice that? After the BET Awards, someone told him to stay home.
Yeah, so much the better. You know, too bad it wasn't sooner in the process, but yeah, the less we ever see of that old guy, the better off everybody's going to be. But I'm wondering about this. You know, we've talked about where this sits in the pop culture landscape for this year. My gut feeling, as I told you, that in a sense this is even bigger this year than Obama's inauguration. And looking ahead here, and summertime always seems to be the time of year for shaping, you know, the big pop culture stories of the year. And I'm thinking to myself, short of Kim Jong-il having one of those Typhoon 2 missiles that can hit Hawaii, short of a world catastrophe like that, I don't think we're going to see anything bigger than this, Adam. I think we've seen the story of the year.
One never knows, I suppose, and I hope we don't have one of those tragic
definitely
events.
not.
But the 2 weeks of this, the timing, it was really interesting. And just, I guess my perspective, Rick, is often from the perspective of television, because I've been steeped in it for so long. And this is one of those times of year when there's not a lot else on television. And because it's summer, there's just something about summers, and I know this from being in the news business, where people go on vacations, and life is a little more leisurely. We had the July 4th weekend, which began for many people around Thursday, July 2nd, where this was a great 2 weeks to devote wall-to-wall coverage to a thing, because it wasn't like there was a lot else going on. I'm not sure what they would have substituted it with. I mean, would the terrible murder of this quarterback been a bigger story? You know, I don't. You know, if it had not been for the Michael Jackson logjam, I mean, I don't really know.
Well,
and recall that he followed a handful of other celebrity deaths.
Yeah.
Which was one of the odd things about this.
Well, you wrote about Billy Mays, too. I mean, that was one that was shocking. We were just getting ones in close proximity. It's almost like Ed McMahon, you know, as with anybody else, it's always jarring when it happens, but we knew he was in declining health. Everybody knew Farrah was pretty much near the end. It was just a question of when. Then there's Michael. Then it starts to get a little bit, you know, actually much bigger. And then Billy Mays, we didn't feel it as jarring because he wasn't as part of the cultural landscape. It was more recent than MJ. But in many ways, that was more surprising.
Well, and it just sort of accumulated.
Yeah.
Because I can tell you from being in the news business that the confluence of celebrity deaths, you know, people joke morbidly, you know, how these things comes in threes or pairs or whatever. But to tell you the truth, they don't really.
Right.
Especially in terms of celebrities being like on par with each other. Like I know that newspapers had to struggle with how to handle Farrah and Michael because they were virtually the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't happen that much. And celebrity deaths, editors in the news media differ on them. Some of them tend to downplay them too much. Others tend to say, look, this is what everyone will be talking about, put it on page one. And there's usually a debate about it. I always lean toward the sentiment of page one. And this is because many years ago, I read something about People magazine, which is, if nothing else, one of the smartest edited magazines that we have.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whether you like its celebrity journalism or not. It's a very good magazine in terms of the way it's made. I remember reading that their death covers are their best-selling magazines. You know, the ones where they say, you know, a touching tribute to so-and-so. America says goodbye to so-and-so. You know, so there's something on one level of a celebrity death and one this big as being, you know, a no-brainer. And this is why Anderson Cooper and Larry King have hammered this story every night.
You know
what? And they were right about it too. They're the ones that own this story, to tell you the truth.
Oh, they are, and they're you know, oftentimes good arbiters of what's really, you know, gaining traction with the American people. That's one of these things, Adam. You know, it's universal, and I'll even tie it back to the subject matter of our previous guest, George the Animal Steele, pro wrestler. Let me tell you something. the Insider newsletter, Wrestling Observer, that Dave Meltzer puts out, what are some of the most requested back issues of all time when he's written obituaries for these guys when they've passed away? People want to read the Bruiser Brody tribute. People want to read this, that, and it's not a morbid thing. It's not that Meltzer pushes it that way. It's just, it is what it is. These are the things we gravitate towards, so I can absolutely believe what you're saying about the whole People magazine
in the final
cover.
analysis, we're a sentimental people.
Yeah.
And, you grow up with entertainers. Now, maybe you've been interested in this other aspect as I have. Some of the commentators have noted or claimed or proclaimed that Michael Jackson will in fact be the last celebrity of this caliber because, he came of age and became famous in a time of less media splintering, whether you're talking about just 3 television networks and no internet and just, a handful of huge music companies, that could put their muscle behind one guy, and put him out there all over the world. I guess someone slipped into the conversation recently this tidbit that the album Thriller, one reason why it was so big was it was launched, it was released on the same day all over the world, and that's extremely rare apparently. And this was one reason why he became intercontinental.
That's true.
And it's very interesting. And apparently this isn't done anymore because of blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
I'm sick of hearing about nothing's ever done anymore the way it used to be done.
Oh,
but they're saying, you're not going to have anyone that big anymore. Have you picked up on this?
I have a little bit. And you know what? It ties into a theory of mine because, again, and this is something I've talked about. And, again, I'm a guy who I've never been like a big pop music guy. I'm way more of a rock guy, whatever. So the most popular music of this decade, some of the stuff like that, I don't listen to top 40 stations. So I can tell you what, I know that the Jonas Brothers and Taylor Swift and that kind of stuff, that's like as big as it gets. Chris Brown, I couldn't name you one of their tunes, any of these guys, because I've been able to isolate myself from them. In the 80s, in order to listen to Michael Jackson or Van Halen or whatever, you had to sit through Culture Club and other stuff. These stations were more intermingled. I agree with that point.
I see what you're saying. That's
somebody
very
like me, I can isolate myself from stuff I don't like. People can do that. It is a much more fragmented world, Adam. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do. You make a good point that just the way things were spread out more evenly and more available, there was a certain ubiquity. Mm-hmm. When like either an oldie station or perhaps a light music station that plays older songs will play, I don't know, songs from the 80s or the 70s that you still remember by heart, even if you didn't even like them.
What?
It's just interesting how ubiquitous things used to be, and you're right. We all know you pass a newsstand, you're going to hear about these Jonas Brothers, whoever they are.
Yeah.
Not to sound like an old guy. But you're right, I have no idea what their songs are. And their songs are really only of interest to 12 to 15-year-old girls, probably.
Yeah.
And after they grow out of that, they're probably not going to care anymore. I don't know if they'll be listening to the Jonas Brothers in 20 years.
Probably not. That's the thing. Again, at that age, I couldn't duck the bubblegum music because it was so intertwined with the other stuff. Now I can. Now everybody can. It is a different, day and age, and I think that's part of it too. When you look at the landscape, and I tell you what I want to ask you about also too, in terms of ubiquity and being able to, follow stuff here. You've written recently. You wrote about, as did I think a lot of people in TV, about the Tonight Show transition with Conan O'Brien taking over. And again, you could make the analogy, as we've been talking about Michael Jackson and the universality of him. That was Johnny Carson at one point in time because he had the late night landscape. There was no fragmenting of any serious nature until the late 80s when you'd see a little Arsenio and you'd see some of these, minnows who would try to fashion themselves as competitors. Now it's full-on late night competition. I had theorized at the outset of this, and I realized that it was an outlandish theory, perhaps, but in looking at this, I said, you know what? If Conan struggles at all in the ratings here, and if Leno struggles to get traction at 10 o'clock, because that's a massive experiment on the scale we've never seen before, is it the weirdest thing in the world to say that in a year or two they return to the status quo ante? I wonder if there's even the remotest possibility of that.
You mean putting Leno back at late night?
Back at 11:30. I think Conan would be SOL because I don't think Fallon's going anywhere. But I wonder.
Let me put it this way, Rick.
And
I can't conjure any examples, but I know this to be true.
Okay.
That sometimes it has come to pass that networks will behave unpredictably.
Okay.
That would be the unpredictable outcome. From everything that I've been told, they are committed to this Leno thing come hell or high water at least for a year.
Okay.
I mean, his ratings could disappear, and they would allegedly, this is what they said, allegedly it'll stay on for the year. Whether they'll ever restore him to the Tonight Show, I just don't know. I think maybe another scenario would be if somehow it doesn't work for Leno at 10, then maybe one of the other networks finally grabs him.
And then NBC...
Like that scenario where ABC was going to get him.
Interesting. And NBC, of course, was terrified of going up against him. Is it possible that after a year or two of lackluster numbers at 10 o'clock, they might feel a little bit better? Like, hey, he's not as hot as he was when he was coming off of the Tonight Show. Maybe he couldn't do us in as much damage going up against Conan. You suppose they might look at it that way? They might look at it that way. On the other hand, NBC seems content with lower ratings generally, and their mantra has been in recent seasons as the ratings has dropped, they've said or claimed, well, we're making money hand over fist anyway. It's a business model that works for us. It's about demographic strength. It's not about mass numbers anymore. Mm-hmm. Their cynical competitors, such as CBS, would say, well, they're only saying that because they're not in the game of mass audiences anymore. Right. They've abdicated, and when they do get mass audiences for something like the Olympics, they brag about it. Right. So, it's a little hard to know when they're telling you the truth, which is only part of the time. This is the most fascinating story upcoming in television, which is the 10 o'clock Jay Leno thing. Yep. And how it has affected the scheduling for 10 p.m. shows. And then there's just the issue of Jay himself. Jay's a real winning guy. He goes around acting as if he doesn't care. But he really does, and he works his ass off. Yep. And he's got this comedy thing down to a science. He reminds me of Merv Griffin. Merv did the blandest entertainments you could imagine, and it was on purpose. Mm-hmm. And I remember him saying on the Larry King show once, Larry, I made a TV show out of that paper game you play called Hangman. Uh-huh. Wheel of Fortune, and it was the simplest, most bland thing he could come up with. And he knew it would succeed because it was so simple. And Leno is sort of the same way. Tell a simple joke, get check, and go home. And it's really worked for him. I thought it was wrong of them to drop him from late night. I thought it was just not the right thing to do. I don't think it was time to do it. And what was always puzzling to us people who covered the business was what was this big faith they had in Conan? What was so great about Conan that if Conan got angry and left, what does NBC care? Well, ultimately, in 2004 and in 2008, weren't they in both instances motivated by fear? In 2004, they were motivated by fear of Conan going somewhere and beating down Leno. And then in 2008, it was like, oh, holy crap, what if Leno, we didn't know if Leno would still have traction 4 or 5 years later. He does. God forbid he goes to ABC or Fox or syndication or something like that. So it was fear both times, wasn't it, Adam? Yeah, there's that. I mean, they had different reactions each time. I think you're right to some extent. In 2004, I'm not sure they thought, for whatever reasons I can't fathom, that Leno might not have been as strong in 2008 and 2009. And I think there's another fear, though, which is that, let's say they kept Leno on till he was, 65 or 67, and then he didn't look as good. Maybe he started to lose it a little bit, like Johnny did. You might remember Johnny whistling through his false teeth and stuff like this. I mean, it was time for Johnny to go, whether anybody likes to hear it or not. But he was a lot older than Leno. And maybe they would have felt, well, this is really delicate. We got to ease out Jay. And we don't have anybody. Because the guy we were training back then was this Conan guy. Of course, on the other hand, if Leno was 65, it'd be 7 years from now or whatever it is, or 5 years. That's true. 6 years, whatever old he is. Which means
Someone else might have been groomed. That's the other thing. You know, I'm sort of old-fashioned about show business. Keep the show going as long as you can, and when it's done, hire the next superstar.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And don't worry about it 5 years in advance.
A lot of guys are interchangeable. You're right about that. The thing that's interesting, too, though, about NBC, and it's always fascinating to see what the struggling, down-on-its-luck network likes to do. They're a little experimental, it seems to me, in the sense of what they're trying to do to get hits. Not just the Jay Leno thing, but I look at it that, again, what has become my favorite show of all time the last couple of years is The Office. And they've embraced it. They've built around it, and it is anything but a cookie-cutter show as far as how it goes about that.
That's right. And its ratings are low.
Yeah, it's not a blockbuster in the conventional sense of the 9 o'clock shows of Thursdays past. I mean, but it's by their standards now, it's great, but it's not great by those historical standards.
Well, yeah, they get a very strong, affluent, upscale kind of demographic for it that they can sell.
Yep.
But you're right. They and their detractors say there's too much of this. There's too much of this experimentation. You know, everything looks different all the time. What are you really? But on the other hand, you know, it's all smoke and mirrors. CBS. If you were to, in a couple of words, describe CBS, you'd probably say, well, you know, old-fashioned sitcoms on Monday, kind of grotesque, violent police procedurals every other day.
Yeah.
You know, that's what they are. You turn it on at any time, and there's some dark horror going on.
Right.
And ABC has this kind of like Ugly Betty, Desperate Housewives vibe.
Yeah.
Where everything is sort of like a garish cartoon.
That's true.
You know? And Fox, I guess, Fox is American Idol and you know, stuff like that. And I guess it's American Idol in house.
It's kind of a mishmash.
Yeah. But they succeed at it because American Idol is as big as the Super Bowl now. So, you know, NBC is interesting. And the other thing about NBC is it's such a diverse company.
Oh, it is.
They own all those cable channels. And, you know, if you look at USA Network, they're carrying the kinds of shows that NBC used to carry.
Yeah, they're great shows.
Kind of these hour dramas based on like a couple of hip characters or something, you know?
Right.
Or a detective or a this or that. You know what I mean?
Right.
That used to be the stuff that networks ran.
Yeah, too bad the mothership isn't as imaginative as the USA programmers.
Well, I think a lot of people are finding that they like this. They like those old shows, those old styles. People love that Kira Sedgwick show, The Closer on TNT.
That's true. That's true.
You know, and the Holly Hunter one. You know.
And NBC, again, because of, struggling and being experimental and stuff, I was almost shocked that, especially because the ratings weren't like a blow-away type thing, that Parks and Recreation still got greenlit as a big part of Thursday nights this fall, because I'll tell you how I looked at it. Again, I went in, and I'm a big Office guy, so I was watching, and I was like, I like this. I not love it like The Office, I like this. I'm thinking, I like this, but I wonder how many people get this. I wonder how many people are going to think this isn't too slow-paced and boring and subtle and whatever. So I liked it, but was dubious that it would have a mass following. Somehow it made it past, the 6-episode phase here. But it kind of shows you where NBC's at, because it's the attitude almost seems to be, well, what other cards do we have to play right now?
Well, there's another thing about the NBC DNA, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it is the sheer power of Saturday Night Live.
Right.
And Rick, you may know this even better than I. I don't really recall if Lorne Michaels is involved in this Amy Poehler sitcom, the Parks and Recreation.
I don't think he is directly. I think they pulled a couple people like Michael Schnurr off The Office. That's about it.
But you see, Amy is from there.
Yeah.
And she's been funny in some of her movies, like that Baby Mama movie was diverting when I saw it on HBO recently, and I liked her in Blaze of Glory with Will Ferrell, and she's funny, but I find I'm not a huge fan of hers, and I've watched Parks and Recreation, and she has this flaw, as she did when she did Weekend Update and other things on SNL, where she telegraphs the joke.
Right.
She smirks. She gives like this knowing smirk, and it's a crummy acting job. And NBC, though, seems to embrace that style. And it's almost like anybody coming from SNL now almost gets to do whatever they want to do on NBC. And they must feel like, well, maybe we didn't love that first flight of episodes of Parks and Recreation, but it has Amy Poehler, and she's really of the moment now, and she is. And look what they did with Tina Fey.
Yep.
I mean, and then you could say, well, they did a great thing with Tina Fey. You see, I think, as much as I love The Office, I think 30 Rock is the quality sitcom on TV now. There's something so bright and clever about that show.
It's got some great characters.
It too doesn't get the ratings, gets all the awards.
Yep.
Doesn't have a mass audience. Now, as I say this, I'm recalling that in the last 2 days have come announcements from the NBC Universal Syndication Company, and 30 Rock has gone through the moon, selling in repeats that will start airing in 2011 on local stations.
Okay.
So NBC, if someone was standing here from NBC, they would say, well, Adam, I'm hearing what you're telling Rick Morris on the radio about our show. I'm here to tell you, we just made, $500 million or something. So, the television business is complicated.
Well, maybe they...
And they're not in it to lose money. So I sometimes think they probably have a better handle on it than I would.
Well, I do. They could be justified in thinking they're going to make their money down the road. I mean, for as much as everybody looks back at Scarface, it wasn't so much what it did at the box office that made the legend. It was everything that came thereafter. That's
right, and it wasn't even that good a movie.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, nobody really liked Scarface when it came out, did they?
Right.
We all used to laugh at Al Pacino.
Exactly. By the way, I just ripped off that last take from Entourage. I didn't know what box office it did before I saw it on there.
Okay.
But, that is the case. But Adam, as we look at this here again, you've got your great column at TV Week. You've got your aforementioned blog there with the only billing that I think you really would deserve as far as the best TV writer going today. Between
That's
TV
really nice.
Week, TV Howl, anything else that you got going on that you'd like to plug? Because we always give everybody a chance to plug on this show.
Well, I appreciate that a lot. I don't have anything to announce at the moment, but I hope to resurface soon. Perhaps at a newspaper or magazine, and I'll send you an email, I promise.
Well,
okay?
That would be great. And I tell you what, too, I want to tell you what I said to one of our other East Coast-based writers that we had on tonight, a gentleman named Lloyd Carroll with the Queens Chronicle. I want to say the same thing.
I know Lloyd.
Yeah, it's weird. It was like 6 degrees of separation. You guys, Abe Madcore from Sports Business Journal, who I know at least Lloyd had crossed paths with. It's very incestuous, the group of people we'd had on tonight. You all have been great guests. What I'd like to do, we've got an episode in 2 weeks here called The Pantheon. Every year we vote on the best of the best in sports and pop culture and everything like that.
Oh.
I'd like to email you a ballot and have you among our list of, our jury for the votes that will be announced that night there. It would be an honor to be able to count you among our voters.
Well, you're really nice. I would love to do that for you. I would love that. That would be a lot of fun.
I'd love to get your takes on these things. That would be tremendous. And Adam, it would be.
Can I come back on the show?
Oh yeah, I'd love to have you back on the show here at some point. Absolutely,
okay.
That would be tremendous. Will that be possible?
Oh, probably.
All right. Well,
I never go anywhere.
Probably. That sounds like a concrete commitment to me and to the listeners there, Adam.
Exactly.
So we'll make it happen here at some point. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
it's been great
Rick,
to have
much.
you
That
on.
was a lot of fun. Great interview. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam. Adam Buckman, everybody, from
Good night.
Good night from TV Week and TV Howl, respectively.